Daddy, there you are." The words echoed across the grand ballroom so softly that they should have disappeared beneath the music, yet somehow they silenced everything around them. Conversation slowed. Crystal glasses paused halfway to smiling lips. Even the pianist at the far end of the room seemed to fade into the background. For little girls in matching pale blue dresses stood beside a table near the window, staring at a man they had never met. Ethan Walker looked up from his tea, certain they must be talking to someone else. He glanced over his shoulder. No one was there. The girls smiled. One of them pointed directly at him. "We found you." Another hurried forward before he could respond. "Please don't leave this time." Ethan blinked in confusion. "I think you've got the wrong person." But the smallest girl stepped closer and lowered her voice to a whisper. "Please pretend you're our father." For a moment, Ethan forgot how to speak. Outside the towering glass windows, downtown Chicago shimmered beneath the golden glow of early evening. Inside the luxury hotel, hundreds of guests gathered for one of the city's most anticipated corporate events. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with polished wood and expensive perfume. Waiters moved gracefully between tables. Wealth and influence filled every corner of the room. Yet none of that seemed to matter now. Ethan looked at the four girls standing before him. They couldn't have been older than 8. Their eyes carried something he recognized immediately. Loneliness. The kind children tried very hard to hide. "Why would you ask me that?" Ethan said gently. The girls exchanged nervous glances. Finally, the tallest one spoke. "Because our mom is about to make a huge mistake." "A really huge mistake," another added. "And nobody listens to us." Ethan set down his teacup. His quiet afternoon had been meant as an escape. For the first time in months, he had taken a day away from his small watch repair shop. No customers. No responsibilities. Just a cup of Earl Grey tea and a few peaceful moments alone. Peace, however, had apparently chosen another table. "Girls," he said carefully, "where are your parents?" Before they could answer, movement erupted near the ballroom entrance. Security personnel appeared, scanning the crowd. Several guests turned toward the commotion. The girls immediately stepped closer to Ethan. One grabbed his sleeve. Another reached for his hand. "They're looking for us," one whispered. "Please." Ethan's heart tightened. He had spent years raising his daughter before losing her mother to illness. He knew fear when he saw it. More importantly, he knew when children needed kindness instead of questions. "All right," he said quietly. "For 5 minutes. That's all." Relief flooded their faces. Instantly, the girls gathered around his table as though they had known him forever. One sat beside him. Another leaned against his shoulder. Across the ballroom, heads began turning. Curious whispers spread. And then, at the center of it all, a woman stepped onto the stage. Victoria Hayes, billionaire CEO, one of the most powerful business leaders in America. She adjusted the microphone and prepared to address the crowd. Then her gaze drifted across the room. She froze. Her 4 daughters were sitting beside a complete stranger, and they were calling him Dad. Victoria Hayes had spent 15 years building a reputation that could move markets with a single sentence, yet in that moment, she could not understand what she was seeing. From the stage, beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, her daughters appeared completely comfortable beside a stranger. Emma was smiling. Ava was laughing. Lily was holding the man's sleeve as if she had known him for years. Chloe rested her head lightly against his shoulder. It made no sense. The ballroom remained wrapped in quiet curiosity as Victoria forced herself to continue her presentation. Numbers appeared on giant screens behind her. Investors nodded. Executives took notes. Yet her attention kept drifting back toward the corner table near the window. Ethan felt every pair of eyes slowly turning in his direction. He had never been comfortable with attention. His life existed in small, ordinary routines. He repaired watches. He drank tea. He greeted the same customers every week. Now he sat inside one of the most expensive hotels in Chicago with 4 children pretending he belonged to them. "You really should explain what is happening," he said softly. Emma looked around before leaning closer. "Mom is announcing something tonight." "Something terrible," Ava added. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Terrible?" Lily nodded. "She is going to tell everyone she is marrying Richard." Chloe made a face. "We do not like Richard." Ethan almost smiled. "That sounds like a serious problem." "It is," Emma said. "He only talks about money." "And golf," Ava added. "And meetings," Lily said. "And more meetings," Chloe finished. The 4 sisters sighed together. Ethan struggled to hide a laugh. For the first time since approaching him, they looked less frightened and more like ordinary children. Children carrying worries much larger than they should. Beyond the ballroom windows, evening settled over the city skyline. Thousands of lights flickered to life across the glass towers. Inside, waiters served elegant dinners while a string quartet played softly near the stage. The world around these girls seemed perfect, yet perfection often hid loneliness better than hardship ever could. Ethan took a careful sip of tea. "Have you told your mother how you feel?" Four identical expressions answered him. Disbelief. "She is always working," Chloe whispered. "Always." Ethan looked toward the stage. Victoria appeared confident, polished, powerful, but there was something else in her eyes now. Fatigue. A kind of exhaustion he recognized. The exhaustion of someone carrying too much responsibility for too long. "She loves you," Ethan said gently. Emma stared down at the table. "Then why does it feel like she never has time for us?" The question landed heavily between them. Ethan did not answer immediately. Some questions deserved respect before answers. The music drifted through the ballroom. Silverware clinked softly against fine china. Nearby guests resumed their conversations. Yet at this small table, four little girls waited for a truth they could trust. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Sometimes adults get so busy trying to build a future that they forget people need them in the present." The girls listened carefully. "But if your mother works that hard," he continued, "I promise she is doing it because she believes it protects you." Chloe lowered her eyes. "We do not need protecting." Ava nodded. "We need a family." Before Ethan could respond, a shadow appeared beside the table. A man in a dark suit stood there, earpiece visible beneath neatly combed hair. One of Victoria's security staff. His expression remained professional, but his eyes revealed relief. He had finally found them. The girls immediately sat straighter. Emma squeezed Ethan's hand beneath the table. Then she whispered the words that made his heart tighten once again. "Please do not let them send us back yet." The security officer offered the girls a patient smile, but his relief was impossible to hide. He had clearly spent the last 20 minutes searching every corner of the hotel. "Ladies," he said softly, "your mother has been worried." Four identical expressions appeared at once. Emma crossed her arms. Ava looked away. Lily stared at the tablecloth. Chloe tightened her grip on Ethan's sleeve. "We are not ready yet," Emma said. The officer exhaled slowly. "Your mother is about to finish her presentation." "Exactly," Ava replied. "That is the problem." Ethan almost laughed again. There was something remarkable about the girls. Despite growing up surrounded by wealth and privilege, they spoke with the honesty only children possessed. No rehearsed answers. No corporate language. Just truth. The officer looked toward Ethan. "Sir, thank you for helping. I am sure this has been confusing." Ethan nodded. "A little." The man smiled politely. "Miss Hayes would like her daughters returned." The girls immediately groaned. Several nearby guests glanced over. Emma leaned closer to Ethan. "You promised 5 minutes." "I did. It has only been 3. Ethan checked the antique watch on his wrist and realized she was right. Exactly 3 minutes and 18 seconds. The officer blinked. "You counted." "We always count," Lily said. "Numbers matter." Something about that answer made Ethan smile. It reminded him of his own daughter years ago. She used to count stars through her bedroom window. She used to count the days until summer. She used to count everything because children believed numbers could make life predictable. The memory arrived gently, carrying both warmth and sorrow. For a moment, Ethan stared through the ballroom windows at the lights of Chicago. Then he returned to the present. For little girls were watching him as if his answer mattered. 3 more minutes, Ethan said. The officer hesitated. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. 3 more minutes. Relief swept across the table. Chloe nearly cheered. As the officer stepped away, a waiter arrived carrying a tray of desserts. Mini cheesecakes, chocolate mousse cups, fresh strawberries dipped in dark chocolate. The scent alone seemed capable of solving problems. Ethan ordered 4 desserts without hesitation. "Really?" Ava asked. "Really? Mom never lets us have dessert before dinner," Lily whispered. "Tonight sounds unusual already," Ethan replied. Within seconds the girls were smiling again. The tension that had shadowed their faces earlier began to fade. Around them, the ballroom regained its rhythm. Glasses clinked. Conversations resumed. Investors discussed mergers and acquisitions worth millions of dollars. Yet Ethan found himself paying attention only to the stories unfolding at his table. Emma spoke about books she loved. Ava talked about drawing horses. Lily described a science project she was building. Chloe shared her dream of becoming a baker. One by one, their personalities emerged. Not as quadruplets. Not as the daughters of a billionaire. Simply as children hoping someone would listen. Ethan listened. Truly listened. It cost nothing, and yet seemed rarer than all the luxury surrounding them. Minutes passed. The desserts disappeared. Laughter appeared more often. Then Chloe grew quiet. Her spoon stopped moving. She stared toward the stage where Victoria was speaking with several executives. "Do you think our mom is happy?" she asked. The question arrived so unexpectedly that nobody spoke for several seconds. Even her sisters looked surprised. Ethan followed her gaze. Victoria stood beneath brilliant lights, admired by everyone around her. Powerful, respected, successful, yet something about her smile seemed carefully practiced, like a person carrying a burden nobody else could see. Ethan looked back at Chloe. "I think your mother wants to be happy," he said gently. Chloe lowered her eyes. "That is not the same thing." And for the second time that evening, a child spoke a truth that left Ethan completely silent. The silence around the table lingered long after Chloe's words faded into the music. Ethan noticed the girls looking toward their mother again. Not with anger. Not even with disappointment. It was something far more complicated. It was longing. The kind that appeared when love existed but connection had somehow gone missing. Across the ballroom, Victoria finally concluded her presentation. Applause swept through the room. Investors rose from their seats. Executives gathered around her immediately. Questions followed. Handshakes followed. Smiles followed. Yet despite the crowd surrounding her, Ethan noticed her eyes searching for only one thing. Her daughters. She found them instantly. This time she did not look away. Emma noticed first. "Oh." Ava followed her gaze. "Double O." Lily sat straighter. Chloe quietly finished the last bite of cheesecake. "Triple O." Ethan turned. Victoria Hayes was walking directly toward them. The atmosphere shifted before she even arrived. Guests stepped aside. Conversations softened. People recognized power when it entered a room. Victoria moved with calm confidence, but there was tension beneath it. Concern, frustration, exhaustion. The emotions blended together behind carefully controlled professionalism. When she finally reached the table, the girls suddenly became very interested in their empty dessert plates. Victoria folded her hands in front of her. "Girls." For identical smiles appeared instantly. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, Mother." "You look pretty." "Great speech." Ethan almost admired the coordination. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. Then she looked at him. For the first time, they were face to face. Up close, she appeared younger than the business magazine suggested. Less intimidating. More human. But her expression remained cautious. "I am Victoria Hayes." Ethan stood politely. "Ethan Walker." "Mr. Walker." "Miss Hayes." A brief silence followed. Not hostile, just careful. Victoria glanced at her daughters before returning her attention to Ethan. "My security team informed me that my children have been spending time with you." Ethan nodded. "That seems to be the case." "Did they explain why?" "Not completely." Emma quietly whispered. "Because we are smart." Victoria shot her daughter a look. Emma immediately looked at the ceiling. Ethan fought back a smile. Victoria noticed. For reasons she could not explain, that bothered her slightly. Her daughters rarely laughed with strangers. Yet somehow they looked completely comfortable around this man. It did not make sense. People often wanted something from her family. Access, influence, opportunity. She had spent years learning to recognize hidden motives. Yet Ethan appeared strangely different. No expensive suit. No attempt to impress anyone. No effort to remain near her after discovering who she was. If anything, he looked as though he would rather be somewhere quieter. Still, caution remained necessary. "Mr. Walker," Victoria said carefully, "I appreciate your kindness tonight." Her tone was polite, professional, controlled. "However, I hope you understand my concern." Ethan nodded immediately. Of course. The answer surprised her. No defensiveness. No offense. Just understanding. "If 4 children approached me unexpectedly," he continued, "I would be concerned too." Victoria studied him more closely. Something about his calmness felt unusual. Most people either became nervous around her or tried too hard to impress her. Ethan did neither. Before she could respond, Chloe suddenly slid from her chair. She walked around the table, and stood beside her mother. "Mom." Victoria looked down. "Yes." Chloe hesitated. Then she asked the one question nobody expected. "When was the last time you sat down and had dessert with us?" The ballroom seemed quieter than before. Victoria blinked. Emma stared at her napkin. Ava looked out the window. Lily lowered her eyes. Ethan remained completely still. And for the first time that evening, Victoria Hayes looked less like a celebrated chief executive officer and more like a mother who did not know how to answer her daughter's question. For several long seconds, Victoria could not answer. The question hung in the air with surprising weight. Around them, the ballroom continued moving, but the small circle surrounding the table felt separated from everything else. Chloe waited patiently. Children often did that. They asked simple questions and somehow uncovered truths adults spent years avoiding. Victoria slowly sat down in the empty chair beside her daughters. It was the first time all evening that she had stopped moving. No assistants, no investors, no executives asking for decisions. Just four girls watching their mother. "I do not remember," Victoria admitted quietly. The honesty surprised even her. Emma looked down. Ava folded her hands together. Lily blinked rapidly. Chloe simply nodded as if she had expected the answer all along. Ethan remained silent. Some moments did not need advice. They needed space. The string quartet began playing a softer melody near the stage. Candlelight reflected across crystal glasses. Beyond the ballroom windows, the Chicago skyline glowed beneath the darkening evening sky. It should have felt like a celebration. Instead, Victoria found herself staring at four children who seemed farther away than any business deal she had ever negotiated. "Girls," she said carefully, "everything I do is for you." Emma looked up. "We know. Then why are you upset?" Ava answered this time. "Because you are always doing things for us." Victoria frowned slightly. "What is wrong with that?" Lily spoke next. "Nothing." Chloe finished the thought. "But you are never doing things with us." The words landed gently, yet they struck deeper than criticism ever could. Victoria lowered her eyes. She thought about canceled weekends, missed school events, bedtime stories replaced by video calls from airport lounges, birthdays interrupted by meetings. None of those decisions had felt wrong when she made them. She believed she was building security, opportunity, stability. Yet somewhere along the way, the future had begun stealing from the present. Ethan noticed the change in her expression. For the first time, the polished confidence had faded. What remained was simply a mother confronting a painful truth. Nearby, several executives approached the table. One of them carried a folder. Another checked his watch. "Victoria," one man said, "the board members are waiting upstairs." She looked at him, then at her daughters, then back at the executive. "Tell them I will be a little late." The man's surprise was almost comical. "Late? A little late?" He hesitated. "But the acquisition discussion can wait." The executives exchanged confused glances before quietly walking away. The girls stared at their mother. Emma blinked twice. Ava nearly dropped her fork. Lily looked shocked. Chloe smiled first. A real smile. Small but genuine. Victoria turned toward Ethan. "Mr. Walker." "Yes. I believe my daughters owe you an apology for putting you in an awkward position tonight." Before Ethan could respond, Emma jumped in. "We are not sorry." Ava nodded. "Not even a little." Lily smiled. "Actually, this was one of our better ideas." Chloe pointed at her sisters. "Definitely top 5. For the first time all evening, Victoria laughed. It was not the practiced laugh she used during interviews. It was warm, unfiltered, human. The girls immediately noticed. Ethan noticed too. The sound seemed unfamiliar, as though it had not visited her often lately. Then a voice echoed from the ballroom entrance. "Victoria, there you are." The girls' smiles disappeared instantly. Their shoulders stiffened. Even Victoria's expression changed. Ethan followed their gaze and saw a tall, sharply dressed man approaching the table. Confident, polished, perfectly composed. Richard had arrived. The change in the girls was immediate. Moments earlier they had been laughing over dessert and teasing one another. Now the warmth seemed to drain from the table. Emma stared at her folded napkin. Ava looked toward the window. Lily suddenly found the centerpiece fascinating. Chloe moved closer to her mother. Richard either did not notice or chose not to. He arrived with the polished confidence of a man accustomed to being welcomed everywhere. His tailored suit looked flawless. His smile looked practiced. His handshake was already extended. Before he reached the table, Victoria, he said warmly, leaning down to kiss her cheek. The presentation was incredible. Thank you, Richard, Victoria replied. Something in her voice sounded polite rather than affectionate. Richard turned toward the girls. There are my favorite young ladies. For quiet responses followed. Hi. Hello. Good evening. Hi, Richard. The enthusiasm was impossible to miss because it was completely absent. Richard laughed awkwardly and straightened his jacket. His attention shifted to Ethan. And who do we have here? Before Ethan could answer, Chloe spoke first. This is Ethan. Emma nodded. He listened to us. Ava added, for more than 30 seconds. Lily finished, which is kind of rare around here. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. Richard chuckled as if it were a joke. Ethan simply stood and offered a hand. Ethan Walker. Richard shook it. Richard Bennett. The handshake lasted only a moment, but Richard's eyes lingered. Measuring. Evaluating. Trying to place him. Yet Ethan remained completely at ease. He had spent years repairing delicate watches. Patience had become second nature. The silence that followed felt longer than it actually was. Nearby, guests continued mingling beneath sparkling chandeliers. A waiter carried fresh coffee through the ballroom. Soft music drifted from the quartet. Yet around the table, the atmosphere had become strangely tense. Richard pulled out a chair. Well, we should probably get ready for the announcement. The girls exchanged worried glances. Ethan noticed immediately. Victoria noticed too. What announcement? Chloe asked quietly. Richard smiled. The exciting one. Nobody smiled back. He looked mildly surprised. You girls know what I am talking about. Emma lowered her eyes. Ava stared at her empty dessert plate. Lily swallowed hard. Chloe reached for her mother's hand beneath the table. Victoria felt the tiny fingers wrap around hers, and something shifted inside her. For years she had trusted schedules, advisors, forecasts, and carefully planned decisions. Yet none of those things explained why her daughters looked so unhappy. Richard finally noticed the mood. Come on, he said lightly. You are acting like someone canceled Christmas. Ethan saw Chloe's shoulders fall. It was a small reaction, but it said everything. Richard was hearing words. Ethan was hearing feelings. There was a difference. Victoria saw it too. For the first time that evening, she compared the two men sitting at the same table. One possessed influence, connections, and remarkable success. The other owned a small watch repair shop and had arrived alone for a quiet cup of tea. Yet somehow her daughters had chosen the second man within minutes. That realization unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Then Emma spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. What if we do not want the announcement? Richard blinked. Victoria looked at her daughter. The ballroom suddenly felt much quieter. And for the first time all evening, the conversation everyone had been avoiding was finally beginning. The question lingered over the table like a sudden change in weather. Nobody rushed to answer it. Richard looked genuinely surprised. Victoria looked concerned. The girls simply waited. They had finally said aloud what had been sitting in their hearts for months. Richard forced a small laugh. Come on, Emma. You do not mean that. Emma met his eyes. I do. Ava nodded. Me too. Lily took a slow breath. Me 3. Chloe squeezed her mother's hand. Me 4. The ballroom around them continued glowing with elegance and success, but none of that mattered now. For children had spoken honestly, and honesty had a way of making every other conversation feel less important. Richard adjusted his tie. I think maybe you girls are confused. Ethan remained silent, but he noticed how the sisters reacted. Their shoulders sank slightly, not because Richard had been unkind, because he had not listened. There was a difference. Victoria noticed it too. She looked at her daughters carefully, really looked at them. Emma's determination, Ava's disappointment, Lily's quiet worry, Chloe's sadness. They had each been communicating these feelings for months in different ways. She simply had not slowed down long enough to see it. Girls, Victoria said gently, can you tell me why? The sisters exchanged nervous glances. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of answering immediately, Chloe looked at Ethan. Can he stay? Victoria blinked. Why? Chloe lowered her eyes. Because he listens. Silence followed. Ethan wished he could disappear into the wallpaper. Attention had never been comfortable for him. Yet Victoria continued studying him. The strange thing was that Chloe was right. He had not offered solutions. He had not tried to impress anyone. He had simply listened. Somehow that had become valuable. Emma spoke next. Richard always tells us what we should feel. Ava nodded. or what we should do. Lily added quietly, but Ethan asked questions. Richard looked frustrated. I am trying to be part of your family. That is exactly the problem, Emma replied. You are trying. The words confused him. What does that mean? Ava looked at her sisters before answering. Family is not a project. For a moment, nobody spoke. Even nearby conversations seemed distant. The string quartet played softly near the stage. Candlelight flickered across polished glass. Outside, Chicago sparkled beneath the night sky. Inside, something far more important than a business announcement was unfolding. Victoria slowly released a breath. Then she turned toward Ethan. May I ask you something? Ethan nodded. Of course. You have known my daughters for less than an hour. That sounds about right. Then why do they trust you? Ethan considered the question carefully. He looked at the four girls, then at Victoria. Finally he answered. Because I was not trying to become important to them. Victoria stared at him. Ethan's voice remained calm. Children know when someone is trying to earn a position in their lives. They also know when someone simply cares. The girls nodded immediately. Richard looked away. Victoria lowered her eyes. Deep inside, something uncomfortable began to unfold. Because for the first time that evening, she realized her daughters had not run toward Ethan because they needed a father. They had run toward him because they needed to be heard. And that realization hurt far more than she expected. Victoria lowered her gaze and stared at the untouched coffee in front of her. For years she had believed success would solve every problem. Better schools, better opportunities, better futures. Yet none of those things had answered the quiet ache she now saw in her daughter's eyes. The ballroom felt different than it had an hour earlier. The applause no longer seemed important. The investors no longer seemed urgent. Even the announcement waiting upstairs suddenly felt small compared to the four children sitting around the table. Richard shifted uneasily in his chair. Victoria, maybe we should continue this conversation privately. Emma immediately shook her head. That is what always happens. Ava nodded. Adults go somewhere private. Lily added softly. Then they come back with decisions. Chloe looked at her mother. And nobody asks us anything. Victoria felt her heart tighten. She had always considered herself a strong leader, a careful decision-maker, a responsible parent. Yet tonight her daughters were showing her an uncomfortable truth. Leadership worked differently at home. Families could not be managed through schedules and presentations. They had to be lived. Ethan quietly reached for his tea. He wished he could disappear from the center of the situation. Yet somehow he had become part of it. Not because he had tried, because four children had trusted him. The realization humbled him. Richard leaned forward. Girls, I care about all of you. We know, Emma replied. Then what is wrong? Ava looked directly at him. You keep trying to convince us. Lily nodded. People who really care usually show it. Chloe added quietly. They do not have to talk about it all the time. Richard opened his mouth, then stopped. For once, he had no response. The string quartet began another song. Soft violin notes drifted through the ballroom like a distant memory. Around them, guests continued enjoying the evening, unaware that the most important conversation in the building was happening at a small table near the window. Victoria slowly reached across the table and took each daughter's hand. One by one. Emma, Ava, Lily, Chloe. The girls looked surprised. She could not remember the last time she had done something so simple. I am sorry, Victoria said. For small faces stared back at her. I thought giving you everything meant I was doing enough. Her voice trembled slightly. But somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing what you actually needed. Tears shimmered in Chloe's eyes. Ava looked down. Lily pressed her lips together. Emma squeezed her mother's hand. Victoria smiled sadly. You deserved more than my success. You deserved my time. Silence settled over the table. Not uncomfortable silence. Healing silence. The kind that appears when truth finally arrives. Ethan watched quietly. He had seen many broken watches in his repair shop over the years. Tiny gears disconnected. Springs misplaced. Pieces drifting apart. The hardest repairs were never about replacing parts. They were about reconnecting what belonged together. In that moment, he realized something important. The Hayes family was not broken. They were simply disconnected. And for the first time all evening, they were finding their way back. Then Emma looked toward Ethan and spoke the words that made Victoria's eyes widen. Mom, we do not need a rich father. Ava nodded. We do not need a perfect father. Lily smiled softly. We just want someone kind. Chloe looked at Ethan, then back at her mother. Someone like him. For a moment, nobody moved. The words spoken by the girls settled gently over the table, carrying more weight than any speech delivered that evening. Ethan felt every eye turn toward him and immediately wished they would not. He was not a hero. He was not extraordinary. He was simply a man who had shared tea, listened carefully, and treated for children like their feelings mattered. Yet sometimes the smallest acts of kindness left the deepest marks. Victoria looked at Ethan for a long time. Not as a chief executive officer evaluating a stranger. Not as a woman protecting her family. Simply as a mother trying to understand why her daughters trusted him so completely. Then something unexpected happened. Richard slowly stood from his chair. His expression was thoughtful rather than angry. He looked at the girls, then at Victoria, and finally at Ethan. "I think I have been trying to fit into a story that was never mine," he said quietly. No one interrupted. Richard offered Victoria a sad smile. "You deserve honesty. All of you do." He glanced around the table. "And the truth is that I have spent so much time trying to become what I thought this family needed that I never stopped to ask what this family actually wanted." Emma lowered her eyes. Ava looked surprised. Lily listened carefully. Chloe squeezed her mother's hand. Richard nodded once. "I hope you all find what you are looking for." Then, with quiet dignity, he stepped away from the table and disappeared into the crowd. No arguments. No drama. Just grace. The kind that arrives when someone chooses respect over pride. Victoria watched him go. Then she looked back at her daughters. Tears glimmered in her eyes. "I have missed too much, have I not?" Emma shook her head. "Not too much." Ava smiled softly. "Just enough." Lily nodded. "You are still here." Chloe climbed into her mother's lap despite being old enough to think she had outgrown it. Victoria wrapped both arms around her daughter and held her close. One by one, the other girls joined them. Soon all four sisters were gathered around their mother. The ballroom, the investors, the announcements, the endless responsibilities waiting upstairs all seemed to disappear. Family remained. Nothing else mattered. Ethan quietly pushed back his chair. He never intended to stay this long. This was their moment. As he turned to leave, a small voice stopped him. "Wait." Chloe jumped down first. Then Emma. Then Ava and Lily. The four girls hurried toward him. Emma held out a folded dinner napkin. Ethan looked confused. "What is this?" "Open it later," Emma said. Ethan smiled. "All right." Victoria stood and walked over as well. For the first time all evening, there was no distance in her expression. Only gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. Ethan shook his head. "You do not owe me anything." Victoria smiled through tears. "That is probably why my daughters like you." The girls laughed. Ethan laughed too. Outside the ballroom windows, Chicago sparkled beneath a sea of lights. Inside, something far more valuable had been restored. As Ethan finally stepped into the hallway, he unfolded the napkin. Written in 4 different styles of handwriting were 6 simple words. "Thank you for listening to us." Ethan stopped walking. A quiet smile appeared. Behind him, laughter echoed from the ballroom. Ahead of him, the corridor stretched peacefully into the night. And somewhere between those two places, a lonely evening had become something none of them would ever forget. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.